Great. We should be transitioned over. People of YouTube, let us know if you can hear us, and we can go ahead and get started. Okay, I think the most topical thing, and we can talk about immediately, is this Altair DevNet 3. This was led by Perry and has a different client ratio than our even split on the past few to attempt to represent at least what we know of mainnet today, something like 70% Prism. And last I saw, there were a few things being worked out still this morning. Is there an update on that? I guess mainly because we're going to talk about Piermont, which is in a week, and I just want to make sure that we are still good to go. I imagine anything that has opened up on that, we should be able to settle in the next few days. So my expectation is Piermont's still good, but where are we at?
Sure. So I can just start with a brief of where we are right now. Had a bit of config error in the beginning, but everything smoothened out later on. But today morning, we noticed that the Lighthouse client seems to have lost a lot of peers, and in general, performance doesn't seem to be what we'd expect it to be. I think Lodestar is doing a lot better now. They said they were overloaded and they increased their machine size, I guess. And besides that, there was an invalid signature that was noticed, and some peer scoring related things for Lighthouse. But I think I'd let the Lighthouse team take it on from that.
We're still trying to figure out why we're downvoting peers. I think we're seeing some invalid signatures from our perspective. So still digging into that.
Gotcha. Likely related to new gossip channels or old types or old channels. Like sync aggregate.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay.
I haven't been working on this one. We've got someone else. I'll get some updates and provide something later if I can.
Okay. Okay. Well,
another thing that I don't think I've mentioned otherwise is there seems to be a Lodestar peer that both Lighthouse as well as Prism have banned for invalid, what does it say, invalid sequence number. I'm not particularly sure why that's happening, but I can share the logs and we can take it from there.
One of the things that we're downscoring people heavily for at the moment is for sending us late sync messages, which we're probably going to lighten up on that because it seems a little, it seems like it's fairly likely that we're going to get those because the messages are so short-lived.
Right, so you're
I'm not sure if that's going to be an ongoing problem.
Very tight on like a single slot scope, whereas we should maybe expect a few to be lagging.
Yeah, we still do the gossip.
Shouldn't you be ignoring them rather than rejecting and downscoring peers who send you late messages?
Like I said, not super deep on this one.
Gotcha.
Okay, sure.
I'm gonna sanity check that is an ignore condition. Yeah, it is an ignore condition. But yeah, it might make sense to lighten that up at least once you figure it out. So I moved the client updates to after this so we can just talk about Altair in Unity with this. So we do have a Piermont date set up. Adrian, thank you very much for getting that config ready and porting it to the new format. I just want to sanity check that we expect to still fork Piermont in a week, even if that means cutting some releases Monday, Tuesday, based off the issues we found today. I mean, I think DevNet 3 is serving its purpose. Is that a signal to not update Piermont, or is that a signal to fix things and continue with Piermont? By default, I think we're going to continue to do Piermont on Thursday unless people have strong objection. Okay.
I think in general, the DevNet 3 is also finalizing and everything does look clean. So I'd say there's no reason to delay Paramount.
Okay, so we will obviously figure out what's going on, attempt to get some patches out before then, and if we find related or different issues, hey, Doncred, you are typing loud. I'm muting you. If we find continued issues on Paramount, it will continue service purpose, which is to find issues. So let's keep chatting as we work through the issues on the current DevNet and take it from there. Paramount is on. Okay, since we're talking about Altair, quick on release and testing. It's very likely that we'll get a testing release out looking like maybe Monday, which covers a few edge cases that were not previously covered. Terrence had found a bug in their state transition code that was iterating on like the full validator list rather than the active validator list, and this only surfaced a bug in the event of leak scores being non-zero, there being validators that were not active, so exited or not yet active, and a leak going on. So we did get that case covered in the dev branch and are working on enhancing a bit more coverage, and then we'll get a release out there. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And that's primarily what I have for Altair. We could discuss theoretical dates for Prater and or mainnet, but my intuition is, given some issues seen on the DevNet and with the Piermont launch in a week, that we were better suited sorting through these issues before we try to put a date on anything else. Any alternative feelings on that? Different strategy? Okay. Paramount it is. Are there any other Altair release testing and planning items that we'd like to discuss before we move on to the client updates? Great. I meant to give a huge shout out to Alex and Proto for taking care of this call a couple weeks ago. Very much appreciate it. Heard it went really well, and then I can step down. Okay, client updates. Let's get started with Lodestar.
Hey, Lion here. So we did participate on Altair DevNet 3 and it went well. We overestimate our machine, so had a bit of rough time, but now things are looking good. We are actively working on lowering our memory usage, and we have found 3 strong strategies with the help of Plotto 2. So hopefully we can get that merged soon. And we should release by Monday a light client article with a working demo that will be connected to Altair DevNet 3. And that's it. Thank you.
It's very exciting. Thank you. Prism.
Hey guys, Ishan here. So for the last 2 weeks, we've been mostly focusing on bringing down our changes from our hard fork branch to our develop branch. In the process, we've been carefully reviewing the code we have implemented for Altair, and in the process, we found a bug in our state transition function, as mentioned earlier. So it's not covered by inspectors. So this has been valuable in finding different edge cases. Also, along with that, we've been running short-term testnets with other clients for Altair. So this has actually helped us quite a bit in finding subtle networking bugs that are much harder to find in the bigger devnets. So especially to do with gossip scoring and in the fork epoch transition. So we are happy to have that sorted out. Along with that, we have actually finally implemented all the official API endpoints in our develop branch. So this has been in the works for a long time. So we're happy to have that done. And now we're in the process of implementing our V2 endpoints for Altair.
Cool. Thank you, Nishant. And Lighthouse.
Hey there, Paul here. Not a whole lot to report this time. We did just publish a pre-release, which is 1.5.0 RC0. So this is the release that we're going to ask users to use for the Piedmont fork. We may or may not make another release in the meantime. We just want to try and get everyone ready for it early. We probably won't publish a full 1.5.0 before Piedmont. We're just trying to prioritize those stable releases for mainnet. We don't really want to let Piedmont dictate the pace in which we do things for mainnet. Where now that we've got kind of starting to get that release out the door, which includes Doppelganger and a bunch of other cool features, it also means all of our Altair stuff is now merged out of, it's no longer living in separate branches, and it lives in at least unstable for now, which is pretty cool. So now we're progressing with our weak subjectivity sync. We're also doing some DevOps stuff in the background, finding that AWS is just too expensive in terms of data transfer costs for our types of networks. They want to do big, fancy pipelined things, not decentralized things. So yeah, looking at some other providers. That's about it from us.
Great. Perry's had a lot of success doing some like dedicated hardware. If you are interested in hearing about his strategy there, hit him up.
Yeah, thanks. We've had a chat. We're trying to, one of the ways you can go is like by, buying a giant box and splitting it up, but we're trying to keep it in separate nodes all around the world, so we can do different IPs and stuff like that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
We see in testnets, lots of people running behind the same IP, and it makes things a little bit weird for us. Not representative of normal conditions.
Gotcha. And Grandine.
Yes, hi, this is Solus from Grandina team. So we work more on some fixes and optimizations, and the full focus is now on this multiple runtime support, and this is also part of the LTR support. So hopefully we will have it working in a couple of weeks, or it could take a bit more. So we will see. That's all.
Got it. Thank you. And I'll put in a request again if y'all do have success with multiple runtimes. I think it's a really valuable experiment. So please write a blog post or two.
Yeah. I'm going to do that after we have a bit more solid results, as this is still in process.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Teku.
Hey, this is Adrian. We've got our 21.8.0 release that came out today, and that has Altair support finalized and ready to go. It is scheduled to activate on Piedmont at the right point. So really important that everyone on Piedmont upgrades to that. A bunch of stuff happening in the background in terms of research and other fixes. There's been some Docker upgrades and various little details to make things easier to manage in bigger environments, that kind of thing. But nothing that particularly needs to be called out here. Check the changelog, basically. Yeah, that's us.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. And Nimbus.
Hi, Mami here. So the updates for the past 2 weeks, we now have multi-architecture Docker images. Also, we released v1.4.2, which is an update just before London, because we had a lot of people running client older than March 2021. And they had issue when once jumping from 1.0.13, I think, to our latest client version. So that was an update just for those. it was a DB migration issue. And otherwise, we've been keeping up with Altair. We have a dedicated Altair branch, and just like Lighthouse, so far we didn't want to mix Altair updates with mainnets.
Got it. And sorry if I missed this. Do you have a Piermont release out yet? Or is that primarily going to be in a development branch for Piermont?
Yeah, so for now, everything is in the Altair branch, but
Okay.
we'll put out some like instructions for those who wants to are still running Piermont.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, I had one more Altair thing that Terrence had brought up. Pretty much, we want to see more manual testing performed on these test nets, dev nets. Make sure that we're hitting a lot of these corner cases. I shared an old list of some stuff that I had written down for prior to phase 0 launch. I suggest that we use that. I mean, we don't need those numbers. We don't need 1,000 validator deposits, but use that as a starting point on some of the conditions we want to see, and make sure on that first week of Piermont to kind of hammer it with a bunch of different things to make sure that we see some of the interesting edge cases. I guess additionally, we might, because we control a significant number of the nodes on Piermont, it would likely make sense to turn a bunch of them off to test a stretch of non-finality on a test net that is planned on being moonlit and probably is not the place where users are expecting a super high quality of service. So I think that would be a good place to do some stuff. So maybe over the next couple of days we can come up with a plan on, if and when Piermont goes well at the start, then we can kind of hammer it in finality case and hammer it a bit in non-finality case. Seem reasonable? Any other comments on that? I suggest we just kind of chat about strategy in the early next week. Okay, great. Moving on. Research updates, general research updates. We'll talk about the merge at the next section. Cool.
I have a
Yes,
small update.
please.
So we have this PR open for sharding for an update to separate builders and proposers. This is based on like earlier posts from Vitalik and others about separating MAV and trying to create this market for data. And this should also help, for example, ease the burden on validators to not specialize in every single layer 2, but rather move this burden to the builders. And it simplifies different parts of the specification, and we just merged it after a month of development. But it's not finalized at all yet. So if you want to take a look, please do. And we'll keep polishing the sharding spec in the next few weeks.
Right. Additionally, and also one of the features that I'm really happy about is puts the incentives on the making of that data available directly on the builder's standpoint, who can specialize in particular subnets or shards or different distribution mechanisms. That puts a lot less complexity on the core kind of validator networking spec and requirements. Cool. Check it out. I just shared that. That's 2486. Other research updates or general R&D updates that are not merge? Okay. Moving on to the merge. I believe the merge was rebased both to Altair and London recently, so it is getting primed for kind of the next wave of R&D. And there are a couple of issues that we wanted to discuss. In the rebase to London, the base fee, there were some calculations put in there on the base fee, and the base fee was represented as a UNT64. This is unsafe in some scenarios for overflows. Thank you, Proto, for pointing that out. So there's probably two alternatives. The PR that Mikhail put up, 2548, that moves to UNT256 and has some UNT256 calculations. This is because some of the base fee validations were put into the beacon chain spec. So doing the calculation to make sure the base fee is correct. The other alternative, which I would lean slightly towards, is to make this, a bytes 32 value that the beacon chain doesn't really care about, and that the validations in the execution layer continue to happen as they're happening rather than hoisting them up into the beacon chain. I don't feel super strongly about this. Mikhail, you put up the PR for the UNT256 version. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. As Dennis said, that this field has been introduced by Rebasing with London, and when I was doing this, I was like thinking that UNT64 would be pretty much enough in general case, because it's hardly to imagine that that we will see base fee per gas like, let's say 30 ETH, which is really crazy number. But then Proto pointed out that during the transition process, it might be a valuable attack, though the cost of attack is relatively high, but it depends on the different conditions. So we need to reason about it. And ideally, we don't want to reason about it at all. So that's why this PR. I agree with the option to use bytes 32, but since we would like to move more checks from the execution layer to the consensus layer, or at least duplicate them here for different reasons, it might mean that we just deferring. We are creating the technical debt that will need to be resolved at some point in future. But yes, for now, that's using bytes 32 is a viable option. Also, as I understand, it matters for sharding as well. So Proto might comment on that. So it might also be valuable to introduce you into the 56 for sharding. And one comment from Potus, which makes sense from some standpoint, is that we may use bytes 32 for the transition process, and then when we need to introduce this check for the base fee computation on the consensus layer, we may shrink it down to UNT64 and use the UNT64 arithmetics because we will be safe. We will be in a safe position after the merge. The downside is that we will shrink it down, and there will be discrepancy between the execution layer, the cardinality of this field in the execution layer and the consensus layer. So that's actually pretty much it. Just wanted to hear from implementers what do they think about it, whether it makes sense to introduce like this arithmetics even to 56 right now, or like defer it for some period of time.
So can you explain again why this attack matters prior to the merge, but does not exist after the merge? The overflow with UNT64?
The incentive will there is an incentive of miners to break the merge, right? So they can collude and merge this kind of attack.
Okay.
That's it. And yeah, there is no incentive like to burn. The amount of ETH burned to emerge this attack depends on the starting point where base fee per gas is. Like for example, if it's 1024 GWei, So it will require 82,000 ETH to get burned, and it will require like 110 blocks to merge. Yeah, that's crazy number, but it depends on the price of ETH.
So is it correct to say that someone could do this today, though, hypothetically, and break beacon chain?
The beacon chain.
No.
Yeah. The beacon chain only really knows about like block roots from ETH1 right now, and isn't doing any sort of computation.
But after the merge, it will start doing such computations. Is that correct?
I see, and Mikael, I don't fully understand your argument as to why that computation should be hoisted to the consensus layer in general, because it, in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily need to be there. I guess it allows for an earlier simple check for validation.
Right, yeah, because it allows for the simple check. So, but the cost of this check is relatively high, relatively to other checks that we have. And in general, we there is, like, as I understand it, the general line would be to move more checks, as much checks as we can from execution to the consensus. I think it makes sense.
Does so the fact that you can do this check tells me then that you have the full transaction list in the beacon client or in the consensus client? Is that correct for the previous block?
Yes, but does transaction set required for this?
The reason I'm asking is
we're
it seems
checking
like
we're checking the computation of the base fee for gas, whether it's done correctly.
Right, which requires
blocks.
Right, and so that in order to calculate the correct base fee for gas, you need the full set of transactions for the parent block, which is fine if you already have it, but I definitely wouldn't want to make you guys make the consensus clients have to start tracking all that just so they can do this validation. The execution client's going to do it.
You can just use, I would assume they would just use the gas used in the block header and then assume that's, accepted.
Yeah, so
I see, okay.
have the previous block header.
Gotcha, okay. Just so if we go down this path of having the consensus client do more checks, there's pros and cons there in general. So the pro is that we have even more things that are validating consensus, which is good. So the more diversity in code we have, the more likely it is that we're going to catch bugs before mainnet. The obvious downside, of course, is if we now have 8 clients doing the exact same check, there is a higher chance that one of them will get it wrong and we'll have a consensus failure. Like there's some diminishing return on number of unique implementations of a thing before it's no longer beneficial and it's only harmful. I don't know if that number is 4 or 8 or something else.
Right. Even when I was looking at the London rebase, I was certainly unsure of the base fee calculation being hoisted, the correctness calculation being hoisted in the consensus layer. I don't see much value in doing that, maybe ever. Especially if it requires the introduction of a UN256 computational type, which we've attempted to avoid, but we also made that decision literally years ago. So we could certainly revisit that decision. I agree that if it is requisite for doing the base fee calculations with respect to sharding, that we might just have to bite the bullet and have UN256, and then they have a different conversation here. But I think that an investigation is still underway.
And UN256 specifically being basically meaning anything beyond 64-bit, is that correct?
Yes. Big.
Okay, so like 128 isn't any better. Yeah. Okay.
Better, I don't know. I just and maybe clients have rich support for big integers already. It probably depends on the client, but that was just a design decision made a while ago was to avoid the requirement of those types.
I can very much appreciate that desire. I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea, but just to brainstorm, we could check to see if it's reasonable to have the execution client just cap that at UN64. Like that's a big enough number that it's like a significant percentage per gas of the entire supply. And so I feel like it's a number that if it ever reached that, like like there's no possible future where that's reasonable. Like even if ETH is worth $1, even if ETH is worth $1 million, whatever, like even if ETH is the global universal currency, that number still doesn't make
So
sense.
you're putting a max. You're saying you could put a max in the actual 1509 spec.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
Exactly. We could just say, talk to the execution layer and say, hey, can we just cap this at 64 bits? It makes our life easier, allows us to do some things that, you know, we'd like to do, and that may go over well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but can't it be then overflow in the same scenario?
No, it would have a max value, so it would not be able to go higher than that. Would be the idea.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it would just cap or.
In the consensus layer, you still multiply this number, right?
Right. So it wouldn't.
If you want to do the check,
it wouldn't be the full 64 max int value. It would be some value less those calculations.
Actually, that's a good point. That's going to be a pretty significant some value less because it's a 64-bit by 64-bit, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, 64-bit times 64-bit, so 63 bits, I guess. Is that right? Is my math right there? Or is it 32 bits?
It depends on the max value of what you might be multiplying on the other side. You know, it might actually be you're only multiplying by 8 bits or something.
Probably 64 bits minus 1 should work. Okay, so, and do we want to try to introduce this change to the execution layer first? But yeah,
I think we need to do the napkin math to decide what restriction we'd actually be putting.
One more argument for the UN256 is that it's just one computation. It's just O of 1, whereas we didn't use these larger integers for validators or other fields because it would amplify revenue validator. This is much more manageable in terms of performance.
Right, but there's two sides to the argument. One is the unnecessary computational requirement, and then the other is the introduction of a different type and potentially library, which if you're just doing one thing is an argument for avoiding the introduction of that additional complexity.
That's the most compelling argument to me. Let's avoid adding a new library dependency.
Does anybody have any other things to add here? I think we can probably take it to the issue. I guess we could also, do clients have UN256 support already? Or is that still something that was avoided in clients? We haven't talked about it in years. I will take your silence as there is no support for 256-bit arithmetic currently in clients.
I mean, we have clients in the same languages that cover the same math for ETH1 with 256 bits. So it's definitely out there.
Right.
It's a matter of, can we plug it into ETH2 or not?
I just wanted to point it out that CPUs, current CPUs, all of them would support, or most of them would support natively 128, right, but not 256.
Right.
In all languages, I mean, Go, Rust, JavaScript, there are already libraries developed for ETH1 with 256. So it's just a matter of taking those, integrating into clients.
Right.
Yes, but that brings in yet another dependency, which, you know, when you're worried about supply chain attacks and stuff, one more dependency is just one more attack vector. It also, you know, there's some of those dependencies, you know, they function but are not great. Like I've used some of them and it's painful. in some languages. Some of the languages are good, like they integrate really well, especially if you have operator overloading in your language. Then adding new integer types is fine. If you have no operator overloading, then your code is just uglier. These aren't strong arguments. These are just things to keep in mind when introducing a new library.
If we're going to need to do this for sharding, in any case, this discussion's kind of moot, right?
Yeah, so let's at least finish that investigation, which Proto just started a bit yesterday.
Also, I'm happy to take this option with Bytes32 until we decide to introduce the 56 sharding, or we decide to reduce this field on the execution layer, and then we can use it as event 64.
Okay. I suggest we move on to the next item, which is merge-related client security settings. I don't know if that's the appropriate way to call them. Essentially, some specified CLI arguments for handling exceptional scenarios in the event of the merge. So minor attacks or all sorts of other things. These would be used to socially coordinate against exceptional scenarios to kind of force the merge through in the event that our hard-coded logic doesn't exist. You can see an open issue where we're discussing this. There's two discussion points. One is what are these parameters, and the two is actually where do you specify these parameters. I think you could do merge/client settings.md, another markdown file. There's a bit of a precedent for this in EIP 1011, which was the hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. We had some client settings that were specified so that social coordination in the event of attacks was treated as kind of first-class citizen. So mainly just wanted to bring this up so that you can take a look at it and also to hear any feedback about these settings actually being specified in the spec like they are. They're kind of like security-related client settings that probably everyone should implement if they end up in the core specs. Is that a reasonable place to specify these things? Has anyone taken a look at this? Any comments?
I'm a little bit nervous about trying to use the exact same CLI argument name across multiple clients because we've all got different styles for naming. Right. But the concept of you should have a flag for that, that does this in roughly this way makes a lot of sense. And I think we should basically just do that routinely. Like we've got an override for the Altair fork epoch. Right. And that's helped in a number of cases with Eth2.0 upgrades, the Constantinople that didn't happen, for example. Some people just disabled it with an override and so on.
Right. And it probably even makes sense to actually revisit some of the client settings that are in 1011, which were used to like force following a chain with a certain hash, like that allows you to essentially socially coordinate against an attack, which is one of those things we always talk about, but actually isn't probably very feasible without those client settings being specified. Okay, I hear you on the naming. We can kind of abstract that out to not put that weirdness in there.
Yeah, I mean, I can look at the details. It might be okay to be the same, but it's just
something to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with Adrian that keeping within client consistency in the naming is probably the most valuable thing, but it definitely would be nice from a support standpoint if the clients all used like the same words, and like if one does camel case, other one does snake case, other one does hyphens, then we can, whoever's supporting your users can easily adapt. When the names are just totally unrelated though, it becomes much more difficult to keep track of, okay, what was it that this particular client used? So like the more close we can keep the names, the better.
Yeah, so I think having an example name in the spec that generally fits most clients would be great. We just maybe don't make it kind of a must requirement to It's a strong suggestion.
Okay, well, we'll continue the discussion about the couple of settings that might be useful in the event of exceptional scenarios around the merge, and work on a common way to be able to specify these within the 2.0 specs repo, which I think will be, fork/client settings.md. And we will also revisit a few of the settings that we decided many years ago that were valuable for 10.11 that they're not really commonly supported and probably should be, and maybe get those into the spec as well. Anything else on client settings? I think we can leave the particular discussion around which ones are valuable for the merge to that issue. Please check it out if you're interested. Okay, cool. And then our closing few points, anything related to spec that we'd like to discuss, or anything otherwise that you'd like to bring up today?
Yes, there are new BOS test vectors. Big thanks to Antonio. We just published them today. You can find them in the GitHub Ethereum org. I'll link it in chat. And the idea is basically that we can test all these BOS libraries outside of the Eth2 test suite. So hopefully we can share this with other projects as well, and then keep expanding the test vectors.
Excellent. So Proto, but there are likely still a few Eth2 specific BLS targets that would be building and releasing with the spec tests. Is that correct?
So for now, that's correct. We might move them over, but we'll see what works best for the clients.
Okay. And just some quick background. The BLS tests that are built against the spec kind of evolved out of necessity as we waited for official IETF vectors. It doesn't make sense for most of them to live so tightly coupled to our spec and end up being less useful for others that just want to use these libraries. So now they exist somewhere else. Cool. Anything else people would like to discuss today? Okay, thank you everyone. We will continue to work on the DevNet 3 issues and have an exciting testnet fork in 1 week's time. Talk to you all soon. Take care.
Thanks to everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.